Everyone remembers that moment, even if they wish they didn't. A small child drifting through that Las Vegas house, barely able to stand, her eyes unfocused, her body shutting down in real time. Viewers could see it, fans could feel it, and yet the adults in charge seemed paralyzed, distracted, more concerned with routines and schedules than with the quiet emergency unfolding in front of them. At the time, most people chalked it up to bad judgment, a terrible mistake, a father who didn't realize how serious things had become until it was almost too late. But what if that version of events was never true? What if this wasn't ignorance at all, but a decision? What if the near loss of a child wasn't a tragic accident, but a risk someone knowingly took? Because now, years later, something disturbing is resurfacing. Information circulating behind closed doors suggests that the medical crisis involving Truly Brown is no longer considered settled history. It's reportedly being re-examined in 2025, not as reality TV drama, but as a potential criminal matter. And the focus isn't just on moral failure. The attention is on paperwork, insurance records, financial decisions that may have placed money ahead of a child's life. Blurred images of documents are appearing in private circles, stamped with language no parent ever wants associated with their name, an active child safety investigation. That single detail changes the entire story. What once looked like neglect may now look like motive. When the cameras originally captured that season, the explanation was simple and convenient. Busy household, too many kids, a bug going around, dehydration mistaken for something minor, overwhelmed parents who got it wrong. The show moved on, the network moved on, but the internet didn't. And it seems the authorities didn't either. New theories emerging from people close to the family's former inner circle paint a far darker picture, one rooted not in confusion but in financial panic. For years, the public was sold the idea that this family always put the children first. That belief may have been the biggest illusion of all, because according to information now being whispered by sources who once had access to the family's private systems, the delay in seeking medical care wasn't about misreading symptoms, it was about money. Not simply lacking it, but choosing where it went. There are reports of a recovered digital calendar from that exact period, allegedly shared among the adults, not filled with birthdays or filming notes, but with coded reminders tied to income. During the days when Truly's condition was worsening, entries were allegedly marked with a chilling instruction: no emergency room, wait for payment. If verified, that phrase doesn't suggest hope for improvement. It suggests stalling, waiting not for a fever to break, but for funds to land. Investigators are reportedly examining whether health coverage had quietly lapsed at the time, and why. The theory gaining traction is that money meant for insurance premiums was redirected elsewhere, specifically into a failing jewelry business that was hemorrhaging cash, a business that one wife was emotionally invested in and one husband was desperate to keep afloat at all costs. If that theory holds, then what happened wasn't delay through ignorance, it was a gamble, a bet placed on a child's body holding out just long enough for a commission to clear. Fast forward to now, and that context casts recent behavior in an entirely different light. Observers tracking Kody Brown's movements have noticed patterns that don't line up with the public explanations: sudden solo trips, late-night drives between states, claims of handling property matters that don't match his usual habits. This is a man who delegates labor. He doesn't move furniture himself. So why now? Why the urgency? One explanation being discussed behind the scenes is evidence: physical records, old billing statements, financial ledgers, boxes stored in a Nevada unit that recently fell into default. When storage fees stop being paid, Contents don't stay hidden. They're sold, discarded, or seized. If someone realized that proof of insurance lapses and intentional medical delay was sitting in a forgotten box, accessible to strangers or authorities, panic would make sense. Destruction would make sense. Midnight drives would make sense. Viewed through today's lens, the footage from years ago becomes haunting. Back then, people saw distraction. Now it looks like fear. Not fear for a child, but fear of consequences. A man standing in a kitchen asking if his daughter felt okay, while his real concern may have been whether walking into a hospital without coverage would expose his finances. Not monitoring symptoms, but watching a bank balance. Not waiting for recovery, but for a transfer. And then there's Robin, often portrayed as anxious and overprotective, yet conspicuously absent from accountability in that moment. Allegations now suggest she wasn't passive at all, that she may have been actively administering home remedies in place of professional care, remedies that, according to medical experts, could have placed even more strain on already failing kidneys. If that's true, it reframes her role entirely, especially if funds diverted from insurance directly benefited her business. That's no longer indirect harm, that's personal gain. The reason this story is exploding now, after all these years, may lie with Truly herself. She's older, articulate, aware, and she reportedly has a new doctor in Utah. During what should have been a routine appointment, details about her childhood medical history are said to have raised alarms. This wasn't dismissed. It couldn't be. Medical professionals are legally bound to act when past neglect comes to light, even years later, especially when the harm was severe, especially when the patient is now old enough to describe what happened in her own words. One call can reopen everything. When authorities communicate across state lines, old files don't stay cold for long. Suddenly, a situation once framed as unfortunate becomes actionable. And that's why documents labeled as active investigation are reportedly causing such fear. This isn't a fan lawsuit. This isn't online outrage. This is the state demanding answers. The family once claimed constant fear of government interference because of their lifestyle. That fear may have served another purpose. It provided cover. It discouraged scrutiny. It justified secrecy. But if emergency care was avoided not to protect beliefs, but to protect bank accounts, then a child was used as a shield, and that's where everything crosses into criminal territory. There are whispers of coded language used among the adults to discuss money off camera, and fingers are quietly pointing toward the one person who always handled the books, Janelle, logical, methodical, a woman who understood exactly how exposed they were. Sources suggest she flagged the missed premiums, she warned of the risk, and that the final decision to delay care was still made. If true, that means this wasn't chaos, it was calculated. What's more chilling is how much sense the timeline makes now. Financial stress hidden from viewers, pressure to keep up appearances, resources funneled into vanity projects while essential protections quietly vanished. Medical neglect isn't a mistake when it's tied to money, it's a felony, and lying to medical staff about delays turns it into a fraud. Then there's the audio. Reports are emerging of a recovered voicemail, allegedly deleted years ago, but pulled from cloud backups shared across a family plan. An audio file tied to the exact night Truly was finally hospitalized with kidney failure. The voice is said to be Kody's, the tone frantic, not asking about test results, not asking about pain, whispering instead, urging that his name not be used, warning about finances, about the state looking too closely. Two words repeated with finality: "We're done." Those words reframe everything. This wasn't a confused father. This was a man aware enough to fear audits, social security checks, insurance scrutiny, a man weighing exposure against his daughter's survival. And if that voicemail is authenticated, it doesn't suggest stupidity, it suggests intent. The final betrayal may come from the person he trusted most with the books. Janelle didn't just leave the marriage. According to insider theories, she left with records, copies of everything, medical bills, bank transfers, notices, evidence quietly boxed away for the day the truth surfaced. And that day may be now. Investigators are reportedly in possession of materials that trace money meant for healthcare being rerouted into a private business just days before Truly fell critically ill. If proven, this isn't a civil matter. It's criminal. It's child endangerment paired with financial fraud. It's reckless disregard for life. And the behavior in Flagstaff reflects that reality. Silence, locked gates, blinds drawn, reports of process servers waiting unanswered. Innocent people don't hide receipts. Innocent people don't shred documents at night. Innocent people don't barricade themselves in mansions when questions arise. What's happening now looks like desperation. Assets quietly appearing on resale platforms, luxury items listed under vague seller names, watches, artwork, collectibles once flaunted on television suddenly marked for quick sale. This isn't downsizing, it's liquidation. Defense attorneys demand cash, and cash is something he no longer has. Rumors suggest even jewelry stock is being dumped for scrap, harem-loom heirlooms repurposed as bail money. If accounts are...
People still remember that footage, even if they try not to. A little girl drifting through that house, barely responsive, her body giving quiet warning signs that no one in charge seemed willing to confront. Viewers could sense something was terribly wrong long before the adults admitted it. At the time, outrage was simple. Fingers pointed at a distracted father, a chaotic household, a failure to act fast enough. Most people believed it was carelessness, a horrible oversight, a moment that went too far before anyone realized the danger. But what if that story was never the truth? What if what played out on screen wasn't confusion, but hesitation with a reason behind it? What if Truly's medical emergency wasn't just mishandled, but deliberately delayed? Because information surfacing now suggests that what nearly cost that child her life may no longer be viewed as a tragic mistake, but as something far more serious. Years after the cameras stopped rolling, whispers are growing louder that this incident is being revisited in 2025 under a very different lens. Not as television drama, as a legal matter. And the focus isn't sympathy, it's paperwork. Sources claim authorities aren't circling because of poor parenting alone. They're reportedly looking for financial records tied to insurance coverage that may have disappeared at a critical moment. Documents allegedly circulating in private channels show references to an active child safety inquiry dated this year. That detail alone turns an old storyline into a present-day threat. Back when it happened, the explanation sold to the public was neat and harmless. Everyone was busy. The symptoms were misunderstood. It was assumed to be nothing more than dehydration or a passing illness. Overwhelmed parents made the wrong call, then moved on. The show closed the chapter. But the internet didn't forget, and it appears the state didn't either. Because insiders now suggest the delay in medical care had nothing to do with misunderstanding symptoms. It was about money. Not the absence of it, but where it was being spent. The long-standing image of a family that always prioritized its children is now being questioned in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. There are claims that digital records from that time, including a shared family calendar, tell a very different story. Not reminders about filming or family events, but coded notes tied to income and payments. During the window when Truly's condition was deteriorating, certain days were allegedly marked with instructions that implied avoidance of emergency care until funds cleared. If confirmed, that doesn't suggest hope for recovery, it suggests waiting, deliberately. Investigators are reportedly exploring whether health insurance had quietly lapsed during that period, and why. The theory gaining traction is that money meant to keep coverage active was redirected elsewhere into a failing business venture that was draining resources fast, a venture emotionally tied to one wife and obsessively protected by one husband. If that theory holds, then what happened wasn't panic, it was a gamble. A calculation that a child could hold on just long enough for cash to arrive. And that possibility changes everything.
When you look at what's happening now, the past starts to feel disturbingly alive. The behavior being reported in the present doesn't belong to someone at peace with old mistakes. It belongs to someone panicking. People tracking Kody Brown's recent movements have noticed patterns that don't match the explanations being offered. Sudden drives between states, long overnight trips, claims about dealing with old properties and moving items that don't add up. This is not a man known for manual labor. He delegates, he outsources. So why is he suddenly doing everything himself, at odd hours, under the radar? One explanation keeps surfacing among those watching closely. Evidence. Not digital rumors, but physical proof. Paper trails, old medical bills, insurance notices, financial ledgers, records that were never meant to see daylight. There are reports that a storage unit in Nevada, allegedly tied to the family, recently went into default after payments stopped. When that happens, contents don't remain private. They're opened, cataloged, sold, sometimes seized. If someone suddenly realized that documentation linking financial decisions to delayed medical care was sitting in a dusty unit vulnerable to discovery, panic would be inevitable. Seen through that lens, the frantic travel starts to make sense. This doesn't look like nostalgia or housekeeping. It looks like damage control, a race against time to make sure certain papers never fall into the wrong hands. And when you go back and re-watch the footage from years ago, it hits differently. What once looked like distraction now reads as fear. Not fear for a child's health, but fear of exposure. A man asking routine questions while avoiding the one place that would create a permanent record. Hospitals don't just treat patients, they document everything. They ask about coverage, they file reports. Walking through those doors without insurance isn't just expensive, it's traceable. It begins to look less like waiting for improvement and more like waiting for money, less like monitoring symptoms and more like checking whether a transfer had cleared. The pauses, the delays, the excuses, all of it takes on a darker meaning. And then there's Robin. She has long been framed as the anxious, overly involved parent, but questions are now being asked about what role she actually played during those critical days. Allegations circulating suggest she wasn't simply standing by, that she may have been actively managing Truly's condition at home, relying on remedies and supplements instead of professional care. According to medical experts, certain fluids or treatments can worsen kidney distress rather than relieve it. If those claims are accurate, then avoidance of the hospital wasn't passive, it was intentional. That matters, especially if the funds diverted away from insurance directly supported her struggling business, because that shifts the narrative from collective failure to personal benefit. It raises the possibility that one child's suffering was indirectly financing another adult's project. What makes this situation explode now, after so many years of silence, is Truly herself. She isn't a voiceless child anymore. She's older, she understands her own history, and she reportedly has a new medical provider who listened carefully when that history came up. During what should have been an ordinary appointment, details about her past care allegedly triggered immediate concern. This wasn't brushed aside. It couldn't be. Medical professionals are legally obligated to act when credible signs of past neglect emerge, no matter how much time has passed. Especially when the neglect was severe, especially when it involved life-threatening injury. One conversation is all it takes to reopen doors that were assumed to be closed forever. Once that call is made, everything changes. States communicate, files resurface, old assumptions are questioned, and suddenly what was once edited into a dramatic storyline becomes a case file. That's why the appearance of documents marked as an active investigation is reportedly causing such alarm. This isn't social media speculation, it isn't fan outrage, it's the system asking questions it should have asked years ago. And the irony is hard to ignore.
For years, the family claimed fear of government scrutiny because of their lifestyle. But if emergency care was avoided not to protect beliefs, but to protect bank accounts, then that fear was misplaced. Worse than misplaced, weaponized. A child may have been used as insulation against financial exposure. There are also claims that coded language was used among the adults to discuss money without alerting production, and attention keeps circling back to the person who always handled the numbers, the one who understood exactly what was at risk. Sources suggest warnings were given, that missed payments were flagged, that the danger was known, and that despite this, the decision to wait was still made. If that's true, then what happened wasn't chaos, it was choice. And choice carries consequences.